I'm talking to Lawrence Mitchell at Life Beyond Labels. Lawrence, how did you find out that you were autistic?
Well, one of my children was going around repeating everything. It was driving us bananas. He must have been about 12 years old at the time, and everything he was doing, he was repeating dozens and dozens times. And my wife jokingly said to me after watching a television program that we were both watching, it was all about autism and Asperger syndrome. You know, Lawrence, maybe you've got Asperger syndrome, because apparently in this program it says that if you're going to get your children diagnosed, you need to get yourself diagnosed, because it's in the genes. It's all to do with the genes. So I thought of laughed it off. How could I have Asperger syndrome? Anyway, a few months later, I decided to get myself diagnosed. In fact, I can remember a psychiatrist, and he spent quite a lot of time with me and my mother, and went through all sorts of things in our history, etc., etc. And he says, "Lawrence, I'm afraid to tell you," or rather, it was actually, "Lawrence, I'm afraid to tell you," but when the 4-page report came back, it clearly read that I had Asperger syndrome, I had ADHD, and I had motor challenges. But getting back to my son, I started to put 2 and 2 together. We had recently been on a trip to New York, and he made me go into every single electronic shop in New York. He was looking for a calculator. It wasn't pointed on me actually buying him a calculator. He had always thought that prices in New York were a lot cheaper, and he was determined to buy this calculator. It was no good me telling him that this calculator would be cheaper to buy back home with the shops he was going into. All they were doing were conning people into believing they were cheaper. Of course, when we got home, I went to the shop, and lo and behold, I saw his calculator at half the price that he had paid for it in the shop in New York.
So was this compulsive, obsessive behaviour indicating that he too was autistic?
Well, I had wanted him to get him diagnosed. He in fact got himself later on diagnosed. In fact, was when he was about 16, with obsessive compulsive disorder. So whether or not he had traits of autism in him is of course debatable.
So does compulsive obsessive behaviour not come within the autistic spectrum at all?
It does, but you've got to understand, autism, there are so many different labels. It is impossible to say whether or not someone is autistic just because they've got OCD, obsessive compulsive disorder.